So in this educational video, I will take you through networking, which is a crucial part of cybersecurity, ethical hacking, or IT in general. You need to have basic and medium networking skills to get started in cybersecurity or hacking. You may ask why? Because if you'll be performing your daily tasks, you need to understand what you're actually doing. So let's get started. Right, so I'm just going to get straight to the practical side of networking, as I think this is the best way to learn. And this program is called Cisco Packet Tracer, which you can get from Cisco Academy or Cisco NetAcad. Just sign up and you can download it, right? Okay. So let's get started. When you launch this program, you don't really need to go about and learn the user interface. I think it's very, very simple. I will obviously show you how to use this interface and how to use this program. So don't worry if you don't understand anything, right? Okay. So if you come to the left corner, what you have is you have all these devices. You're not really interested in most of them. You're interested in switch and devices. And I would say that's it for now, right? So what we're going to use is we're going to use a switch. So if you come to the left corner, network devices, and come to the second category, which is switches, and take the switch 29060, put it in the middle of your screen. Come to the second category, end devices, and make sure it's the end devices as well. PC, so you're going to take PC. I would recommend something between 2 to 4 PCs, as you don't really want to have too much because there's no point. And a server, right? So you should have basically 6 devices, a server, a switch, and 4 PCs, right? Layout, I would recommend laying like this, as it makes it so much simpler to basically look what you're actually doing, right? Now, I need to explain these devices, what they actually do. A server is important because this is your domain controller, and it's very, very important that you have this, because without Cisco Packet Tracer, without this, you can put DHCP, which makes everything so much easier. I'm going to explain everything. I'm going to explain what's DHCP. I'm going to explain what's default gateway. I'm going to explain what's DNS and everything in a second, right? But first of all, let's connect everything together. So if you come to the left corner, you have connections, right? When you take the cable, click the PC to the switch. Now what we're doing, now you may ask, actually, why are we not connecting to the server? Why are we connecting a switch? The purpose of a switch is to connect multiple end devices like computers, printers, whatever you can really think of, or even routers, or like, as I said, anything. The purpose of a switch is to connect devices together, right? And then eventually to connect them either to a server or another switch or wherever, right? It matters really what scenario you're in. But in this case, so it matters what scenario you're in, but in this case, we're in an office, right? So we need to connect it to a switch. So take all your computers, connect them to a switch. And one thing you're going to notice that this connection, right, has a green arrows. This means it's a successful connection and it has been basically fully configured by the switch, right? It does this automatically. We don't need to do anything, right? So we'll change in a second. If you want to speed this up, you just need to come to the left corner and press this arrow. And as you can see, it changed instantly, right? It's basically what this does, it just speeds up the time. Okay. Now what we need to do is now we need to connect the server with the switch, because if you don't do this, then it's just not going to work, right? So you need to connect the server to the switch. Okay, now this is what we have done. Basically, you have created a successful LAN network, local area network, and is one of your most common networks, right? Okay, so let's actually do something right now, and I'm going to show you a DHCP, right? So since we have everything connected right now, what we need to do for these computers to communicate and access the server, for example, if you want to access let's say, example, you want to access the web server's website, right? Now, they can't access it because there's no IP addresses. And I'm going to show you how to set this up, right? So you set up your server. So we need to do is come to config. Sorry. Actually, first thing we need to do is we need to set up the server's IP address. So we need to go up IP configuration and make sure your servers need to be static. The reason is because DHCP, if you put DHCP settings for a server, for the server or the domain controller, it needs to be static. It cannot change, because then it's just going to, whole network will fail and you're just going to hate yourself for doing that. So make sure it's static, right? And what I like to do is I would like to put 192.168.10 and something, for example, 2, right? For example, 2 or 3, I like to be my servers. And if you click enter, what it does automatically is sets the subnet mask. Also, what you can do is you can set the default gateway, which I do highly recommend, to the server. So set it up. And also the DNS, set it to the server as well, right? Because these are basically the settings. Okay, done, right? Okay. Now what you're gonna do is you're gonna close this and you're gonna come to services, DHCP, make sure it's turned on. Default gateway, put your server's IP address, so 192.168.10.2. DNS server, same thing, right? Okay. Now the start of the IP address should be something with, I would say the first 10 IP addresses is from 2 to all the way to 11 or 10 should be reserved for your devices. So any routers, any switches should be reserved, or any administrative PCs or anything like that should be reserved, right? So I'm gonna, in this case, I'm gonna put, let's say 15 will be my starting point, right? And you can just save it, so make sure you save it. And once you save it, what you have done is you've successfully configured your DHCP. Now, all you need to do is come to your computer, desktop, configuration, and DHCP. Now, if you have done anything successfully, as you can see, it automatically got an IP address. Now, every time, even if I was to, for example, shut down the server, or something was to happen with these IP addresses, or something was to happen with the network and there's no connection, these computers will automatically get IP addresses and all the settings as long as there's a DHCP server available. Right, so as you can see, all these computers are connected. Now, if I come to a web server, go to desktop and terminal or CMD, command prompt, and I type in following ping 192.168.10.255. What this will happen is this will basically ping the whole network, something called the broadcast address. Now, what this will do is we'll ping every single computer in the network. And as you can see, we have 4 computers and I'm getting a response from every single computer, right? So 16, 15, 17, 18, that's 4 IP addresses, which means they're all successfully connected, right? And this is one way to test if you have internet connection with these, if you can communicate with these computers, right? A computer connection you would test by pinging 888. I don't know if Cisco packet tracer will allow me to do this. Yeah, it's not going to allow me. But if you have a computer and you want to test your internet connectivity, all you need to do is type in ping 8888. Now, what is 8888? That is IP address of Google. It's a DNS server. And that basically allows you to test if you have internet connectivity, right? Because it's at your network and it's also just an easy address that you can access, right? So something to know. Okay. Right. Now, so once you have your network, what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain all these basically settings that I just told you to set up, right? So IPv4 is your internet protocol address. So that is your local area network. This is not your ISP, right? I'm going to explain all of these mean in a second, right? But let me just explain what is IP. IP address is your basically, as I said, a way to communicate with computers, right? So for example, if computer 1, if computer 0, this computer wants to communicate or wants to access a web server, right, it's going to use an IP address, right? Or a domain name or a host, right? But in this case, we're going to use an IP address. So when this computer wants to access, I'll actually show you this right now. I don't know if it'll work. Let me just actually see. Right, so example, I'm just going to show you. I'm on a web server. I'm going to put HTTP 192.168.10.2. Yep, there we go, it worked, right? So this is a web server that this web server is hosting. So I just put this IP address, that this computer can access. Now, actually, you can do this the same on your home network because every single router, I'm pretty sure every single router, has a configuration web page. So if you put this IP address, if you put your default gateway IP address, one way to find your default gateway is if you come to command prompt or type in CMD and you type in ipconfig, it should tell you something like default gateway. And if you put this IP address, HTTP 192.168, it's usually 11 or something, it will show you the router configuration, right? And this is technically the same scenario. This computer wants to access this web server. So I put the IP address of the website, right? Which in this case was HTTP 192.168.10.2. And what I've managed to is access the web server. Now I can change this web server, right? Very, very easily because it's just simple HTML, right? HTML is used to create websites, right? Right, okay. So now what I want to do, if you go back to IP configuration and you come to subnetmask. Subnetmask is basically used in creating networks and used to divide the IP address, right? So basically if you change the subnetmask, you have a completely different network. Right, that's the purpose of a subnetmask. Also, subnetmask changes. I will explain subnetmasks in a second, along with the IP address classes. Now the default gateway is, as I said, your router's IP address, or in this case, it's our server's address, right? So the domain controller is our default gateway, which is responsible. In this case, it's our web server because he's in charge. If I was to set it to 8888, then I would resolve my domain names, domain name system, domain IP addresses to domain names. For example, google.com translates to an IP address, which I'm pretty sure is, I think it's 8844, if I'm not wrong. I may be wrong. It resolves the IP address to domain names, and it does this reversely, right? So IP addresses to domain names and domain names to IP addresses, right? And that's like a circle, right? Right, so this is what it does, right? Hopefully I explained some stuff. Hopefully you understand that. Also, one thing I want to explain is DHCP. What does DHCP actually do? DHCP stands for Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol, DHCP. And the way, as you saw, DHCP works is it automatically assigns IP addresses, right? So I'll just demonstrate. I just basically, for example, I just reset the computer. I'm going to click DHCP. And as you can see, it just gives us a new IP address. And you can do this how many times you want, right? And it's going to automatically assign. This is what happens when you connect your device to the network. It automatically gives you DHCP settings. And the same thing is if you connect your computer to a switch or your router, it gives the same thing. It gives you automatically DHCP settings. Unless you didn't set your DHCP settings and you need to do it manually, then yeah, but you're going to have a hard time. Because then you need to remember everything about your, what's my IP range, what's my subnet mask, what's my default gateway, what's my DNS, and much, much more, right? So it's just easier to set up DHCP, especially if you're a beginner. So now there's going to be a crucial part for cybersecurity and ethical hacking, right? So I need to explain one thing to you. What I've showed you before in Cisco Packet Tracer, which was in the program that you just saw 2 seconds ago, is your private IP address. So the IP address you see here right now, ETH0, that's just a network adapter, is my local area network. This IP address does not go out of my local area network, and you cannot access this IP address outside of my LAN network, right? Because you just can't, basically, right? Without any difficult explanations, because this IP address is only usable in my private network. However, there's one IP address that is usable outside of my LAN, and that is called the public IP address. So this is my, so let me actually just clarify. This is your private IP address, and this is your public, right? The only way to get your public IP address is through the internet, because then you can use like Amazon, or you can use like DNS leak test to tell your IP address, right? So as you can see, this is my IP address. This is my public IP address, and this is the public address that basically my internet service provider or ISP gives you, right? So this IP address, if I was to, for example, expose my web server, and I want, for example, people to access my web server, then I need to expose my my port 80 or port 443, which is, I'm going to explain ports in a second as well, because it's very important for hackers to understand ports. So if I was to expose my web server to the public, then you can access outside of my network. Anybody in the world with internet connection can access through this IP address, can access my web server, right? So something to be aware of, that there's 2 IP addresses, right? So one way to get IP address, as I said, is your ISP, your public IP address, which is your network's network that identifies your network, is through the internet. And your private, which is your device, basically just to simplify, your device's IP address is just to go your computer settings, type in ifconfig, that's for Linux if you're on Linux, and for Windows it'll be just ipconfig/o, right? That's the simplest way to get IP addresses. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to demonstrate for you guys how to scan ports and how to see ports and to see the versions of ports. And this is basically practical. As I said, this video is going to be a lot of practical, because I believe practical stuff is what gets you really understand stuff, right? So I'm going to show you stuff in a second. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to basically scan a device on your home network for any, for example, vulnerabilities, or to show you, for example, any ports open, which then you can access, and then you can access the data, or you can actually set this up yourself, right? So what we're going to do, I'm on Linux, right? If you don't have Linux installed, there's on my channel, there's lots of videos how to install Kali Linux or Linux overall. And basically it's very, very simple, right? So what we need to do is just run sudo nmap svsc, and we need the IP address. Now the IP address for me is 192.168. 88.136, and basically what's going to happen is Nmap. Nmap is basically, for full, the name of this tool is called network mapper, there we go. Network mapper. And what this tool does, is it will show us any open ports, it will show us the operating system, and it will show us any vulnerabilities that could be found in the system with simple scans, right? So, okay. So as you can see, what we have returned is port 21, which is FTP, right? So ports are basically services, right? That's all we need to know. For example, when you have your IP address, and sometimes you might actually see, I'll actually show you this. For example, if you have IP address like 192.168.88.21, and then you have like a port 22, that basically means that this is the IP address and this is the port, right? So the port is 22. This is also why it's very important that you do know the most common and default ports, right? So let me just actually go back. Okay, so port 21 is FTP, right? What this means is that we can access the port 21 with, in a second I'll show you how to access this, right? And that's basically it, right? So sort of import. There's also some Windows default ports, but we're not really interested in these. These are very, very common ports. They're always open when you have a Windows device, right? Or 90% of the time they're open, right? But what we can do is that when you find a port open, right, through an Nmap or Shodan or any other basically scanning tools, right? What we can do is we can type in FTP, and we're going to type in 192.168.88.136. And as you can see, what I've just done is I've connected to a service, right? So I'm going to put anonymous because that's basically what I've set it up. I've set it to anonymous, and what I've done is I've logged into an FTP server. Now, what is FTP? So FTP basically stands for File Transfer Protocol and allows you to share files, download files, or host files, right? Which means as long as you have internet access and you have permission or you have credentials, even if you don't, you technically can still access these files, right? So if I type in ls, as you can see, I get 2 folders. So I get folder 1 to 3. Can I do this? Nope. So I need to go to, actually, let's see what's here. There's nothing here. And let's go to files. And there's actually a file here. Now, if I'm able, I think I'm able to do, if I do touch hello.txt, nope, I'm not able to. I'm not able to create files, or I just can't remember the command. I generally cannot remember the command if there is one. But what we can do is with FTP, we can upload files, as I said, and we can download files, right? I will show you how to do this. So if you come to FTP, I can just get files like this, and I just downloaded a file, right? This is the purpose of FTP, right? Okay. Now, if I was to be, for example, any other ports open, for example, like port like 22, what we could do is we can log in as SSH, right? And if you come to Google, right, so just come to Google and you type in most common ports. What this will do is we'll show you the most common ports, right? Now, you don't need to study these, but basically it is very, very good if you're a network cybersecurity specialist or a hacker. You need to know the most basic ports. Now, the most basic are as basically all of these here, right? Ports 443 and 80 are basically websites, right? So if a computer has a port 80 open or 443, that usually means there's a web server somewhere, right? Right. So for example, 22 is SSH. That allows you to log into devices, and basically you could basically control them, right? Or in command line, or you can get RDP, which is the same thing. You can control a device, but it has a user interface, right? As a hacker, most likely use SSH because you need to basically, you will learn the command line as you go along. So as the more you learn in time, you're just gonna understand how to use SSH and how to use a command line and how to exploit using a command line, right? And that's most likely the best idea because it basically is much, much simpler. I love the command line rather than the user interface because it's so much simpler, right? So as I said, it is very, very easy to basically just come up to Google, just learn some of the most common ports, and you can do some Nmap scan, get a device, open some ports, go on the YouTube channel. So you go on YouTube and get some tutorials how to open ports and how to exploit them. And that's how. So just one important thing I want to show you is that when you enumerate a target, and you, for example, are certain, or you want to make sure that there's no hidden services, because this happens, that you have like additional web server or like a hidden FTP or SSH on a high port, right? Because how I said, like the default ports, like port 21 as FTP, doesn't necessarily mean that someone doesn't change it. And it's actually very, very simple to change the port, because for example, as you can see, I just changed the port, the default port's 21. And for this example, I changed the port to 241. And you can do this with any service. You can have an FTP or like a SSH service on a port 10,000, 65,000. So you need to enumerate your targets properly. Now, I just changed it to a low service low number, because I'm not waiting half an hour for Nmap to finish its scanning, right? So just set it to like 241 so it doesn't take as long, right? So very important that when you enumerate your targets and you're certain there is supposed to be something, if CTFs teach you this very, very well, that if you can't find something, you need to enumerate further. You need to dig deeper. So very, very important that you need to be aware that if I don't find something what I'm looking for, it could be hidden, right? So to be something to aware of, to enumerate your targets properly. Now, I want to show you guys one more thing, which is basically the importance of updating your software, and the importance of actually being able to tell if something's vulnerable or no. So what you have here is an FTP version, right? And the FTP version, as you can see, port 21, which is the default port, no problem. FTP open port, and it tells you Pro FTPD 133C. Now, you may not know, but I know that this version is vulnerable. I have used this exploit many, many times in my tutorials. But overall, obviously, I don't know every single exploit that happens, because there's exploits being released every day and there's vulnerabilities being found every day, right? So I want to show you how do you actually check if there's a vulnerability or no, right? So if you type in search exploit, now if you don't, I'll show you another way, which is just using your internet. I'll show you this in a second, right? So search exploit, and I'm gonna put 133C, right? And what happens is, as you can see, there's basically two exploits. One of them is Metasploit, which is Metasploit is just a program that has many, many exploits, and it is a very, very simple framework in running exploits. And there is a compromised source backdoor remote code execution, right? So actually, there's basically sort of one exploit, but whatever, right? So in this exploit, we just basically, by just scanning, doing an Nmap scan, we just found out that Pro FTPD of the version 133C is vulnerable to a command execution or remote code execution, which is very, very bad, because this allows me to run any single command, any command I want from anywhere, right? I can be in Africa and I can run a command and I can exploit this server, right? So this is the importance of updating your servers or versions of everything they have, and just keeping automatic updates. Very, very important. Now, you can argue that automatic updates are good and bad, because just CrowdStrike, for example, they have messed up messed up half of the world, but usually updates are very, very important because they're lifesavers, right? So very, very important that you do know what versions you're running and you update your software regularly, right? Very, very important. Right, and the second method to basically find exploits is just to use the internet, right? I'm actually going to show you. I'm going to type in Pro FTPD, if I can. Let's just type in 133C exploits, right? And as you can see, Pro FTPD 133C backdoor command execution. This is one of the easiest ways to find exploits on whatever version you're running, right? And especially if you type in GitHub, what it will do is it will actually show you usually the program or something to exploit, right? As you can see, there's an actual Python exploit that you can just simply exploit against the server, right? Or against the target. So very, very simple, and something to be aware of, that you need to check what you're installing and make sure you update it, because you can get easily hacked if you don't update it. Right, so that'll be it for part 1. I hope you enjoyed. Leave a like, subscribe, comment if you can. Obviously, if you enjoyed, please do, as it'll help my channel grow. And if you need a certain explanation, maybe you want to see something on my channel, please tell me in the comments. I'll make a video about it just for you. Thank you for watching.